Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in. If we could all squeeze in a little bit, I think a bit squashed in. So, yeah, fantastic. Well, welcome to the second session of the day. We've had a benchmark put quite high by the first one about Steve's this morning, which Lisa was involved watching on that one. So, this is the second panel of the day. And I'll introduce my colleagues shortly, but this one's to discuss towards the new London plan and what it all involves. So on the panel, there's myself who's going to chair it, so if there's any questions we get wrong, you know who to blame, it'll be me. We've got Duncan, who'll introduce himself, Jonathan, we've got Robyn and Lisa as well. So if I can hand over to yourselves to introduce yourself in a second. But firstly, I kind of wanted to set the scene a little bit about the London plan. And the importance of, obviously doing a lot of research on it recently. And there's a few facts that I didn't realise, that the magnitude of the importance of the plan itself. So it's very much a catalyst for UK growth and a lot of focus on what it delivers and what it should be delivering. A couple of facts for you. One in every 8 people in the UK live in London. So you can see the scale of the importance of it. And if you took London as an economy by itself, it would be in the top 20 worldwide economies. So it's quite a sizable element. And I know Duncan's going to touch on quite a lot of the bits involved in the UK plan. But one of the headline ones you'll see in the news is 880,000 homes to be delivered in the London plan. So if I pass over to my colleagues, just to introduce themselves. So whoever wants to go first.
Hello, I'm Lisa Fairmaner. I'm head of the London Plan and Strategic Planning at the Greater London Authority. So a bit about me. I've worked in the public sector in London. I've worked in Inner London at Westminster. I've worked in Outer London at Kingston and enjoying the green belt there. And I've also worked in highly regenerating boroughs, Newham, just before the Olympics. So lots of London experience, which I hope can come to bear on the next London plan.
Morning, everyone. I'm Robyn Prince. I'm Strategic Planning Engagement Manager at Vistry Group. I work in the Land and New Business team, so we have 3 London regions, and we source land through the Land and New Business team. I'm a town planner by trade. Don't do quite as much planning anymore, but very keen to talk about the London plan. In terms of Vistry Group, we are delivering, last year we delivered 2,200 homes in London, roughly 50% of those affordable, which equates to about 1 in 17 homes.
Hi, I'm Duncan Cumberland. I'm Development Director for Muse Places. So Muse, we're part of the Morgan Sindall Group. We're a national urban regeneration company specialising on brownfield city centre development. Not quite as many houses delivered in the last year as Vistry, but I'm not sure many people have. But over the last 4 years or so in London, we've delivered over 2,000 homes at about 40% affordable housing. So it can be done on some of the most difficult schemes, I would say, in the city, Lewisham Gateway being probably the sort of flagship scheme there. Just as an aside also, I'm a non-executive director of Home Group, so the affordable housing piece to me is incredibly important, and I'm very, very well plugged into the challenges in the sector at the moment.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Seeger. I co-lead the policy team at Business London. Business London is a business membership organisation with the mission to make London the best city in the world in which to do business, working with and for the rest of UK. And we have a very strong interest in the London plan and trying to work very closely with Lisa and colleagues to provide a private sector perspective on where we think the plan should go.
Brilliant, thanks very much. So what we'll do, we'll have a few questions into the panel itself, and then we'll jump in some questions at the end. So get thinking about questions, and if you don't ask a question, you don't leave the tent. So coming to you, Lisa, first of all. So the plan's been a long time coming, and there's a few quotes in there, refreshingly honest, which is good, and a lot to get into your teeth into about it. So, how did you go about getting obviously the London plan in place, and what are the principles behind it all?
Yeah, thank you very much. So for this consultation, that's gone out running from 9th of May through until 22nd of June, so get your consultation responses in. builds on 2 years of engagement through the Planning for London programme. And that programme had fundamental principles of openness. We publish everything. We don't have any meetings behind closed doors. We recruited 160 people in cohorts of 40 people each who were representative of London as a whole to try and understand, not to try and convince, but the breadth of views that existed out there, and to sit really comfortably with the fact that everyone thinks different things. You're always going to annoy some people and please other people, and we need to be comfortable with that. We're not going to get everybody to agree, but ultimately we have to do something. We have to produce a new plan, but perhaps more importantly, London needs to change and grow, and we need to set the parameters for how that's going to happen. And also really listening, actually. We certainly don't have the solutions. The challenges that are on the table at the moment for London are absolutely huge and unprecedented. And that includes the conditions that we're working in, the economic conditions and the challenging environment for delivery. So we really do need to listen to everybody, take evidence, take information, take views, and then try and work a way forward. I think the other thing was to really look at London as a place, not talk about policies, not talk about a plan, but actually talk about a genuine place, and a place that has evolved throughout its past, and it needs to evolve massively going forward into the future. Obviously, we had the general election last year, and it became very obvious after that that things were really ratcheting up a gear in terms of housing delivery in particular. The housing need figures from government were going to become mandatory, which was a game changer for London. London had always calculated its own need figures and used those, but the changes are actually more fundamental than the actual figures, the making of the mandatory housing need figures. And then obviously the changes to National Greenbelt policy has got a lot of press, but they were also really important in the context of London that had never done a strategic Greenbelt review, and Greenbelt had been off the table previously. I think another real game changer that may or may not be evident from the outside was being able to be positive about London. And there's many great cities in the UK, but there was a period of time where mentioning London was highly problematic and just simply couldn't be done. And you can't plan for a city if you can't talk about it, and you can't plan for a city if you can't be ambitious and positive on behalf of that city. So that's really changed things for us. So in that context, we set about preparing a consultation document to go out, and also just reflecting that the current London plan that we have was a game changer as well, and it really moved the dial in things like environmental policy, the greenest London plan there's ever been. We're introducing whole life carbon, circular economy, urban greening, and energy standards. All of it which were huge at the time. They were very forward-thinking at the time. And then now people have picked those up, and I see colleagues in the room who have taken those concepts and then moved them forward one step, and now we need to catch up again in the next London plan. So in terms of the challenges that we're planning for, we obviously have set out in the London growth strategy dual priorities, and there's been the real clarity that there are two priorities. The first one is housing delivery, and the second one is economic growth, and also recognising the intrinsic relationship between the two, that the housing issues are a massive drag on London's economy, they're a drag on productivity, and so we can't have one without the other. So as noted, 880,000 homes, absolutely huge amount, never built at that rate before previously. The only time we got close was the 1930s. Fundamentally different conditions at the time in London, and London changed massively in that interwar period, as many of you who are in London and live in interwar suburbs will realise. And just thinking through what that might physically look like, what does nearly 1 million homes look like in London? Where do they go? What's the housing form that can actually accommodate that level of housing? And starting with brownfield delivery, going forward, the vast majority, if not all of those homes, are going to have to be flats. And when we had the expansion in the interwar period, they were predominantly homes, single homes, in terraces or semi-detached. That cannot be the case. We simply don't have the land available to continue to build like that. We would run out very quickly. Interesting to know, a kind of very early bit of modelling we did just to look at the transport that we have already in the green belt to give you an idea of the land take. With the existing transport that we have in the green belt, you could only really deliver 300,000 homes because the densities are so low. So you're not even getting close to where you need to be, even if you release the entirety of London's green belt within London's administrative boundary. If you had an open checkbook and you could put new rail lines everywhere, you're still only getting up to 500,000. So if that puts into perspective the land take that you need if you're going to build at low densities, I think that makes it really clear. And then looking at how you capture development value uplift to make sure that you continue to deliver the affordable housing, but crucially how you deliver the transport projects that need to accompany it. Because without the transport, there's a whole lot of homes that are just simply not on the table. They will not be built, they cannot be built, because the capacity of those sites needs to be used for the storage of vehicles and for vehicle infrastructure. And then we just come on to diversifying the housing market. So we had the benefit of the London Housing Delivery Task Force. The Deputy Mayor, Tom Copley, brought together people from across the industry to understand the barriers to housing delivery and looking at what those, the response to what that needs to be. And that really needs to be to diversify the sector. So we need small builders to be in there of all different scales, and we also need that council house building programme to continue. We need lots of different players. We need to leverage in patient capital, and we need different people in the market in addition to the players that are already there. And finally, just it can't be an either or. It has to be an and. So we can't say, oh, you could do this or you could do this. It's going to have to be that and that and that and that. So all our policy levers need to be thrown at it to get anywhere close to those numbers. And then just a slight mention on economic growth. We've got Use Class E came in since the last plan was written. That's a huge opportunity to think much more flexibly and openly about our town centres, about our employment areas. We're looking at a new designation within London we haven't had before that recognises economic activity that are not located in town centres and not located in industrial locations. So that's something quite new. And look at how we work. There's many sectors identified nationally and in the London Growth Plan, but they sit a very uneasy companionship with planning, which is all based on the use class order, and how we make that work to promote those sectors, particularly those growth sectors.
Brilliant, thanks Lisa. So we touched on a couple of those points yesterday, and obviously some of the headline stuff you mentioned as well in there, but obviously Duncan, coming to you. You've had a bit of time to digest it now. You know, what the boldest plans within the plan itself? What's your key takeaways?
Thanks. I mean, quite a few of them mentioned just now, actually, but I mean, obviously 880,000 homes over the period. Wow. I mean, what am I doing here? We should be out getting it done. So that's a big ask, and I think we're going to touch on viability later and delivery timescales. But it feels the right level of ambition, and it's ambition. If I'm making sense here, ambition with pragmatism. It's saying we've got to help our delivery partners get there. So, you know, still brownfield first, and there's a big but. You can also look at these other, you know, green belt and grey belt, and I'll let others speak to that because that's a very big and new but, I think, which is quite exciting. It's great to see affordable housing remaining a priority. As a business, we're really focused on that, and we've found ways of delivering it, and it's not just the right thing to do. Frankly, it's good for cash flow as well, speaking commercially, if you can make it work and it assists delivery. But the role of BTR and co-living being acknowledged within the plan, I think is massive as well, and that's going to the pace of delivery. So as a developer, if you look at a number of our schemes, we'll do private sale, we'll do affordable, we'll do co-living and BTR, all in the same scheme, but that allows you different funding streams to accelerate. So maybe some clarity around the policy environment for those uses in particular, which can vary borough to borough. And that brings me to another point where I really like the way the plan talks to and is asking whether it will get more consistency with the local boroughs. And I know there's a number of developers in here as well. Get planning twice in London. Let's see what we can do to really try and streamline that. Final one for me, I think, is I quite like this piece. I think it's around a sort of connectivity metric. So where we're going to the suburbs and you're sort of linking height, density and scale and metroising, I think, the suburban rail. And this doesn't mean building the Shard at Barnes Bridge, I don't think. I think we're talking about appropriate densification. And as a business, we've done this all over the country. And I can point in particular to a scheme in Bristol, actually, that we did called Wapping Wharf, where we were unable to go more than 7 stories due to various viewing corridors, etc. But using that mansion block and courtyard kind of configuration, we were able to actually secure some really, really good densities. And I think in some of those locations, looking at that level of densification and the mansion block approach, again, having that sort of ratification from on high that we can do this, I think is really important and really, really welcome. So those were my main takeaways, I think, from my in-depth review of the plan.
Thanks, Duncan. So coming to you, Robyn, in a second. We spoke yesterday about, obviously, the house building side, the business and partnership side merging in 2023, wasn't it, September? Yeah. Given the challenging delivery model, which Lisa touched on viability instead of Duncan, do you think partnerships is a hinderer or a benefit in the process in the market currently?
I mean, just for context and background, so Vistry acquired Countryside Partnerships in 2022, and we've got 36 sites across London. And like I alluded to in the introduction, a lot of those are delivering significant quantums of affordable housing. And all of our land in London is public land, so we've got an assumption that we're going to have to meet a 50% affordable housing criteria, and it works for us. So I have to say, like, when the previous London plan brought in the threshold approach, I think it did give developers clarity on what the expectations were, and that the fast track route existed if you needed it. There could be viability discussions, but there was a quicker way through that. For us, that hasn't played a huge part because, like I say, we are delivering huge quantums of affordable housing. And I think for the new London plan, we would support those high quantums to be retained, but there also needs to be flexibility. And I think the introduction of the accelerating housing delivery planning note, is that right? That was introduced last year. That was really helpful, talking about some flexibility, some different forms of tenure that could benefit from funding. I think that we need more of that more flexibility, a bit of an agile approach, a bit creative, really, to how we deliver affordable housing. And in terms of social rented housing, that's obviously still remains a priority, quite rightly, within the new London plan. But that needs to be supported by the grant funding that in the next AHP. And I know the Housing and Land team are working hard to try and secure sufficient funding for that next programme. But it's absolutely vital for developers like ourselves and, as Duncan said, with Muse, other partnerships businesses, to make sure that we're delivering that affordable housing, but also upfront. So most of our schemes, the delivery of the affordable housing is first because it works for our business model, and it's also the right thing to do. I think sort of the takeaways are the policy developers like clarity. They like to know what's happening and when it's going to happen. So I think when the drafting of any new document also gives that level of uncertainty of what's going to change. But yes, we would continue to support the high levels of affordable housing that are needed in London.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So coming to you now, Jonathan, obviously with Business LDN, representing a cross-section of the economic growth and its members and things, do you think there's enough in the plan to stimulate economic growth across all sectors within there?
So I think Lisa mentioned at the start that the two priorities borne out in the consultation were around house building and economic growth, and I think they are interrelated. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of delivering London's housing need as a way to support recruitment and retention in London. We have huge issues in terms of housing supply and the ability to access London's labour market, and we are really testing it to the true limits of affordability where we're going. So I think the fact that the plan is going to try and significantly ramp up supply is a good thing for economic growth. However, we also need the plan to be, and this is the way that it should be, is the spatial representation of the Mayor of London's growth plan, which has been set out, and I think there is, the new plan can do some useful heavy lifting in that space. I think the positives, as I look at the consultation from a kind of economic growth perspective, are that it does acknowledge London's, clusters, in particularly world-leading clusters in various sectors, and it is trying to promote and support them. The pan-London approach to industrial and logistics land is crucial. There is a tension clearly there between housing supply in some areas, but it also references potentially the ability to be more proactive on greenbelt swaps, which I think is useful. So we absolutely need to protect industrial and logistics space, and I think the plan will hopefully head in that direction. Sensible, I think, to look again at the CAS boundaries. I don't think we want to move away from the support that the CAS provides for London's commercial core, but I think it makes sense to have a look again at the boundary, and also perhaps at the fringes. Sorry, for those of you that don't spend all their day in London, the CAS is the Central Activities Zone, and is the kind of heartbeat of London in terms of its growth and particularly its commercial uses. So I think, absolutely want to reinforce that, but at the fringes, maybe there is some flexibility there in terms of what uses are permitted. Post-COVID, the world has changed, and I think planning kind of needs to catch up with that a bit. And then one very kind of techie thing, which I think the plan alludes to again, is the way that affordable workspace policy works. I'm not so sure it's working that well, essentially, and it's at the moment it's kind of providing a significant amount of supply in new office space in central London for subsidised office space, and I don't think that's where the market really is, and actually we could better use that subsidy in other parts of London where SMEs, where people that really need that support actually would like to be located, rather than in a shiny new office in a sort of slightly alien environment to the industries that they work in. And then finally, the consultation, I think, is pretty clear on the need for a look again at town centres, the kind of hope that we can get perhaps to a sort of polycentric city. Some doubts maybe about that in substance, but there are clearly growth nodes, and repurposing, in this instance, redundant space, I think, in town centres will be crucial to actually providing that economic uplift. And at the moment, that kind of redundant space is obsolescent, and it seems in some areas, the market isn't coming back. So in terms of economic growth, actually moving to housing in that instance is good. So I think pretty encouraging signs from the consultation, and as I'm sure we'll come on to, there's a long way to go. It's a lengthy process, but encouraging signs.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So, Robyn, on the, obviously mentioned before, the green belt, brown belt, also with the Mayor actively, promoting, green belt, but looking at brownfield first, do you think with the adding in the green belt aspect and the willingness to look at it, do you think it's going to make it more difficult to develop on brownfield, do you think?
I think the principal consideration is the level of funding that's needed to develop the infrastructure to justify the release of those green belt sites, and the level of funding that's needed for these very complex brownfield sites in London that will deliver a huge amount of homes. So I think that, for me, is the fundamental question. I think it's even in the plan about there needs to be that balance. And there's some big questions over the level of infrastructure. There's some huge transport infrastructure projects which are sat waiting for decisions to be made. Bakerloo Line extension, the DLR to Thamesmead, they would unlock huge amounts of brownfield land that many of them have consents that are just sat there waiting for that infrastructure to come. That needs to be a priority. We were just discussing it. We were saying if you've put the funding into those transport, not just those transport infrastructure projects, but you help with some gap funding on decontamination or some of these key infrastructure or constraint issues on these sites, you would release a huge amount of housing or deliver a huge amount of housing very quickly. So I think we've got to be careful it's not a distraction. That the priority is deliver housing as quickly as possible. We've got some very challenging economic delivery circumstances that every developer in London is battling with at the moment, and I think you do need greenbelt release and greybelt release. You need those sites to come forward to deliver the homes that are needed for London. But yes, we need to be very careful about the level of funding that is required for those.
Yeah. We touched on that yesterday, didn't we? We had a quick catch up about all the different aspects required, and more of a holistic view of the development and the house, the targets as a whole rather than individual sites and boroughs and such.
I think, just to add, I think it's that time point as well. Like, those greenbelt sites are going to take a lot longer, a lot longer, whereas we have brownfield sites that are sat there, they've got site allocations, they're probably in opportunity areas, they've probably got planning permissions that are waiting to be implemented and are stuck in the system for whatever reason, viability constraints or BSR, and I think you just can't lose focus of that. And I do think the plan is very clear, and the Mayor was very clear last week when he announced it. Brownfield first will still apply, but the money that's needed to help those sites come forward is pretty significant.
Yeah, and there's going to need some additional backing funding to come through and deliver that as well, isn't there? Which kind of leads me on to the viability of sites. Yeah, Duncan's fully aware, obviously, there's viability challenges everywhere, not just in London, all across the UK. So, in London, obviously, the housing market has faltered quite, being polite on that. But do you think it's going to be able to turn the tank around so quickly to start delivering numbers of scale, do you think?
So I think the first lesson I've learned is join the call when they all get together and say, we're going to dosh out the questions. I couldn't join the call, so I got the most difficult one. And this is a difficult question, viability. And let's be really straight about it. It's so difficult, and you touch on a couple of them at the moment. The BSR regulation, the funding market, the issues the RPs have got, so delivery of Section 106 housing. There's a catalogue of issues, but you can probably note from the colour of my beard, and my hair is going that way as well. I've been around for a while, and I looked 2008-9, and there were people saying, no, you are not going to recover to 2007 housing delivery levels for 30 years. But we did. Within 3 years we were recovering. So markets will come back, and we can see those markets, they will come back. But there are some fundamental things which I think the plan is actually addressing. And I think the HRB regulation will have to sort itself out. It's simply got to. So I sort of think that's going to be an 18-month process. But the market will resolve itself. I think what's important is, as I said earlier, the plan acknowledging a broader suite of residential uses. And I think that's something for us as developers to really go at. There is supposedly this wall of money out there that wants to deploy capital into residential. I have a lot of conversations with that wall. It's quite difficult to get yourself over it or try and grab the money back on this side of it at the moment. But it will come. And when it comes, we've got, as I say, build to rent, affordable housing, co-living, market sale. You can have all of those operating in that space, and you can work at pace. To Robyn's point, I think actually there's a load of stuff that's stalled at the moment. There's planning consents. I mean, I'd love to know the numbers. I'm sure Molly has probably got it somewhere. How many consented homes there are out there? 200,000. Thank you very much. Nearer 300. Well,
300.
Whilst we're planning the green belt and metroising the suburbs, let's focus the funding on those. You can twin track these things. So let's get the money thrown towards getting those schemes up and running again. And I think Robyn and I spoke about this last night. Organisations like ourselves, there's not an issue around funding. So this idea that, well, you can go and get a cheap loan. No. Let's find a way of bridging the viability gap. Once you mind the gap, once you get rid of the gap, we're ready to go. And so we'll work on all number of ways to try and look at that. We'll take a reduced margin. We'll look at different ways of doing that. But if we can get that gap, there's 300,000 homes there ready to go at. So I think there are ways of doing it. It's difficult, but definitely I'm seeing a slight turn in the market. HRB position's got to resolve itself. And I'm actually far more optimistic. Probably the sun's shining in Leeds. What's not a lot to like, but actually than I was 3 months ago.
Brilliant, thanks very much. And then also we one part we touched on yesterday, the call you weren't on again, Duncan, but Robyn mentioned the key aspect for you is a lot of certainty, isn't it? Certainty in policy, certainty in plan, because it allows you then to put basis of how you're going to deliver things, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And again, we were discussing this. I think speed of decisions, going back to what I said at the beginning, the plan, talking to aligning local authority policies with the plan. I think that's massively important. So people quite often say about Muse, you're sort of a risk-averse business, you partner, you don't buy land up front. Well, I can say the amount of money and WIP that we commit at planning stage and getting before you start on site, that's as much as a land value on many occasions. So we demand, and I think deserve, more certainty to be able to deliver on that within that process.
Yeah, thank you. And then Lisa, coming to you, obviously the plan talks about streamlining. What do you understand by that, and what does it actually mean within the plan?
Yeah. Well, I'll be writing that. I think there's a lot of things that can be said about a subject, but which things need to be said. And I think really whittling it down to those core things that you need to determine a planning application, or those core things that are needed for the local authorities we work with to do their plan making, because there's a relationship there of general conformity. There's a whole lot of stuff that's come out nationally since the current plan was drafted, which we have to remind ourselves isn't when it was adopted in 2021, but was really around the time of 2017. And there's been huge changes in building regulations. Obviously, we've got fire safety, but there's huge changes nationally, and those regimes don't dovetail properly at the moment, and that needs to be rectified quickly. Where things exist at a national level, we need to step away and let things get on at a national level and not have duplicate. That's not a fault with the current plan. It's simply that things have come along in the meantime. So we need to look at what's going to be national and what's not. We know, obviously, there's national development management policies coming out, expected potentially changes to national policy as well. So we need to keep a close eye on that. Beyond that, we've talked a lot about the threshold approach for affordable housing and certainty. And I think those two things are really twins in policy making. So there are huge opportunities going forward to look at some quite open-ended policies, I would say, and put in place some benchmarks and say, well, if you achieve this benchmark, we're going to stop asking you questions. You're going to stop entering into negotiations. If you can achieve an ambitious but achievable threshold, then we're all done here. Nobody needs to keep going through 400-page documents of evidence with a planning application. And I think really looking at that model, whatever people's thoughts are on the threshold levels now, I think the model of giving that certainty and actually incentivising achieving a certain benchmark, I think is the right one. I think that really direct and simple, say something once and say it for good and leave it at that. And I think as well, being really clear about what the priorities are. I really welcome the Mayor's prioritisation of housing delivery and economic growth, but I think there's other places we can do with that. So, for example, the current plan talks about planning obligations priorities, and it always has done, our affordable housing and transport accessibility. But that's the only time I can think of in the current plan where we're really clear about what is the priority. And so there's potentially more scope for that. I think as well, just remind ourselves, we've got a discretionary planning system. So the planning system is all geared up to be able to weigh up different competing considerations and reach a sound judgment on individual planning applications, taking into account the specifics of the scheme in hand. And we should leave it to that much more, and we should recognise that. And we say it actually in the London Plan guidance at the moment. We say this is not a mechanistic application, rigid application of every single policy. No scheme is going to deliver 100% of everything. That's simply not possible. And be far more open about the fact that we're trying to optimise outcomes through the design journey. This is not about a tick box exercise as we go through. And then I think just going back a little bit to national development management policies, I think with spatial development strategies being rolled out nationally, there's a role that the London Plan plays that isn't well recognised at a national level, which is if there's a policy that only needs to be said once, but it's regionally applicable, the spatial development strategy is the great place to say that. And going forward, I think we should do that. There's no need for 35 local planning authorities to say the same thing. If it can just be said once in the London Plan, I wouldn't want the pressure of it being trumping everything, like the National Development Management Policies. Good luck, whoever's writing that. But as part of the development plan, I think a regional tier of policies that set things out would be really helpful, and again, give that certainty to the industry.
Brilliant, thanks, Lisa. I'm going to go off rogue a little bit here now. Just obviously one point we picked up about the planning, and you mentioned about 300,000 houses stalled in planning. Within the plan, it talks about the mayor having the powers to intervene. Do you think those are actually going to be exercised through the process and move things forward?
Yeah, just to be clear, the 300,000 is not necessarily stalled. So it's things, for example, there's planning permissions that are outline permission, they'll take time to build out. Things like, for example, in Southwark, around Old Kent Road, there are permissions in place, but they've got gradient conditions based on the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension. That never happens, you never get the homes. So that's quite crucial. The mayor has been very clear that he will be more muscular going forward. We need to get these homes built, and he will intervene as and when he needs to.
I think that's a really important part. And I think the mayor did say that in his announcement, was everyone has to pull their weight. At the moment, it feels like generally there's quite a lot of pro-development, pro-growth boroughs, but there's still quite a lot that aren't. And it's a bit disappointing, really, as developers, where you can see huge opportunity and there just isn't that pragmatism or that will for those schemes to come forward. So I do think the mayor's call-in powers need to be exercised potentially, yes, more frequently, as he's alluded to. But also, I think we talked about as well, the consistency approach with the application of the London Plan policies in the boroughs. It's not helpful when you have a different affordable housing target in a London borough. Like you said, it will just mean that it won't come forward. And I think it's that there should be that strategic policy, and then the affordable housing policy for all the London boroughs is exactly the same.
Yeah, completely agree. And then coming to you, Jonathan, Lisa touched on the spatial development strategies. What lessons can be learned over the last 21 years, do you feel?
I think regional planning is a very good thing, and London has benefited from the fact that it is sort of uniquely out there for quite a long period of time, with the only kind of spatial strategy in the UK. I think the lessons are that you need to be strategic. That sounds really stupid because it's a strategic spatial plan, but I think the lessons are that it's creeped over time, and that's a function of politics, and that's obviously very difficult to control, but it is also a function of, I think you have a document and the temptation is to add things in, and there's just one more thing, and it kind of just grows. So, I think the GLA, to their credit, have acknowledged that we're probably, we're 500 plus pages now. It's probably a bit too long for a strategic plan. So, that will hopefully be reduced. So I think you've got to be strategic. I think you got to, Lisa touched a bit on this, and I agree, as I think, as these start to be rolled out across the country, you've got to really focus on what's unique about your area and why, on a regional level, you are commenting on something. So, in the context of London, we have, a housing crisis, and therefore an approach which heavily focuses on that comes up with a threshold approach, whether you like it or not. The thought that the regional spatial plan is having policy on that makes total sense, as does many aspects of the current plan. And I think looking across the UK, other cities thinking, well, what is it in particular that my area requires and is unique, and then formulating policies on that would be important. I think probably not enough is done, although this is a theoretical debate, but probably not enough is done on costing up the plan. So policies have a real world implication. Coming back to our viability discussions, the more that you layer in, potentially the greater the cost to deliver the end product. So I would say greater focus on actually working out what is the cost implication of my plan in total. And then lastly, and I'm pretty sure Lisa may agree with me on here, but poor Lisa and colleagues write this and live it and breathe it, but it's a long process. It's just sort of like painting the Forth Bridge. So, there must be a way to somehow shortcut the process, and I think this government in particular is keen to see traction in this Parliament in terms of all of the promises it's making. So, for other areas starting from scratch, I think they need to find a mechanism which just makes the whole process quicker. As much as everybody likes spending, I don't know how many months doing the examination in public of the plan, let alone the sort of 3 to 4 years preceding that, it is too long. So I think there's lessons to be learned from that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So, Lisa, do you want anything else to add before we go to questions?
I did just want to add in and completely reiterate that. To have 3 inspectors spending 6 months looking at a plan just isn't workable. And the timescales for doing this plan are just so extenuated. And I think as well we need to be more comfortable with using written materials for examining local plans. We don't need to sit in hearing sessions. And much as I love a good hearing session at an examination in public, but I do think they also platform those people who actually have the time to turn up to hearing sessions day after day, week after week. They don't have full-time jobs, and they don't have children they need to get home to or other caring responsibilities. And I don't think that can possibly be right in a post-COVID world, that they're the people who get the biggest say on our cities.
Yeah. Good point, very good point. So I'd like to thank all the panellists for their answering all the questions and sharing their views. But are there any questions from the floor at all before we wrap up? Good, a few there.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I'm Martha Grekos. I'm a planning lawyer at MGLC Legal Limited. I'm co-chairing on behalf of the London Sustainable Development Commission a response to the London plan. So Lisa, you're going to get one soon. And we plan to focus our response on challenging the prevalent narrative that environmental policies are hampering house building. So our aim is very much to lessen the risk of London's environmental policies being weakened in the name of development, and thereby support a sustainable city while still providing the housing Londoners need. Now, I didn't hear from any of the 4 panellists the word environment. And environment shouldn't really be seen as a trade-off to housing development or indeed to economic growth. All 3 should be on a par. So I want to ask any of the panellists, Lisa, you may or may not want to answer this question depending on our consultation response, but can you propose, please, some practical win-win solutions for the environment, for housing development, and for economic growth to all be considered at the same time? Because after all, environment means good sustainable cities, good placemaking, good homes, and equally health.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. I think it's important to note that if we don't get the house building, and particularly we don't get the economic growth, we won't be able to pay for the environmental performance that we need. And so a really positive environment for house building, a very clear planning policy regime, all of those are the way in which we get the standards and the levels of performance that we need from our future buildings sufficiently future-proofed so that they don't have those ongoing burdens in terms of energy needs. But I'll give you a second example. So when we talk about the creation of large-scale settlements, 10,000 plus homes in these greenbelt areas that are yet to be identified, but alongside that, we've talked very clearly about the need for open space, and not just in and of itself as parks that people enjoy, but for all of the environmental benefits that those spaces also provide in terms of things like flood resilience, cooling, greening, and habitat. So all those things have to run hand in hand with the housing that's being provided. So it's not gone away, but we just can't pay for it unless we really fundamentally have a gear change in terms of housing and economic growth.
I think from the developer's perspective, hopefully you'll notice that it was not listed as an impediment, actually. When I was talking about the viability challenges, I didn't mention any of the sustainability, social value, circular economy, things that we're all trying to achieve as being something that we should try to avoid. It is a cost. There are costs associated with it. But actually, can we generate more value from it? And we've just entered into a new joint venture with PIC and Homes England called Habico, which is all about delivering highly sustainable, affordable housing across the country. So what we're trying to find there is opportunities to actually get more value out of this product. So apologies it wasn't explicitly mentioned, but my defensive point is to say that I didn't say it was a negative.
Thanks. Councillor Adam Hugg, Leader of Westminster Council and Chair of Central London Forward. Touched on earlier in the discussion the role the CAS and the area around the CAS can play in terms of housing delivery. I represent a borough that wants to play its part in terms of housing delivery, but a large chunk of it is the CAS. And we recognise that CAS has centrality in terms of overall economic growth for London, but we do really want to sort of strongly encourage mixed use wherever possible, to try and look at schemes to see can they find a way of contributing to housing and housing that people can live in. When we had the last sort of glut of private house building in our borough, a lot of it was prime and super prime stuff that has just been left empty. So, we'd be open for conversations about how you can unlock areas of the CAS working at the right level of density to deliver both business growth and housing, and making sure they're sort of unit size that could plausibly be affordable to have people living in them, as well as delivering the affordable homes we need. Thank you.
I mean, from a kind of broader sort of business perspective, I think the people are in agreement with that. I think the danger is that there's a bit of a lazy assumption about the vitality of the CAS. I mean, yes, it's suffered a bit, but actually the need to reinforce and protect it is there. But as you suggest, mixed-use development, finding the opportunities at the margins to use housing to help reanimate areas and to provide that footfall that sustains parts of London is vital. So I think that's absolutely the way forward. And not many people, hopefully, would dissent from that.
I'm going to break the mould and move away from asking you questions, but I completely agree. Duncan's aware with the developer role. A lot of things will be, when you look at viability, is looking at the income streams. So when you start looking at commercial retail into schemes, it gives you an extra income, so it helps the viability on all schemes. So if you move away from just looking at housing into mixed tenure and all the other elements as well, it does have extra benefit. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. Robert Gordon-Clark, LCA. I've got a very quick question and a very quick question for these. Lisa, do you think we might see a new town announcement in Greater London? And for you three, given the comments made about the number of local authorities and the different policies, and given the move to unitary authorities outside London at over 500,000, would any of you welcome a reduction in the number of boroughs in London? You don't have to answer that one.
Phew, that was close. In terms of new towns, that's not a process we have any control over. It's completely outside of our hands. It sits with the task force. What I would say is that it's common knowledge that there's more new town proposals in London than anywhere else. And so I'll be as curious as you, I think, to see what gets announced. But what I would say, I expect we will hear in July. Yeah, absolutely. But I think more importantly, things that go on the table, whether or not they're in the task force, I'm in the business of trying to find 880,000 homes. So whatever gets put on the table, we need to keep having discussions whether or not it gets announced as part of the task force. If somebody's putting large numbers of homes in excess of 10,000 at a pot, then I'm not going to turn my back on that and go, oh, well, don't worry about that. Sorry, you missed out on the task force.
I think what's important in London, just to add to that, is opportunity areas. So there's obviously a lot in the London plan about the new London plan about the opportunity areas, some of them being de-designated because they've matured, and new ones. But I think it'd be interesting to look at that with the sector about how could they be strengthened? Could there be better sort of, we've seen, streamlining Section 106 contributions across an opportunity area, SIL exemptions, things that could really spur development in those areas, because really they are creating the new towns of London, whether they designate them through the task force or not. And I think they've been a really useful tool, and I think that should continue, but look at ways to strengthen it.
Did you duck the question?
You agreed that on the call yesterday. You were doing all the questions.
Right. I'm not going to answer that.
I'll save you, because we're massively pro Newtown in London. We've done quite a lot of advocacy on this. We've put out a very accessible plug, if you want, a report about why London should get a new town, but not just why, but how as well. So that London actually has the frameworks and the powers at the moment to just go ahead and do this. We can set up a development corporation. We have the powers. They're not unique, but they are pretty comprehensive. The mayor has control of transport for London. He has experience in bringing forward land. There are ample opportunities to actually progress the framework in London quicker than other parts of the country. We have been having frequent conversations with the government about the ability for London to house one. So I don't know if London will get one, but I'm confident that London is getting a good hearing.
No one answered the second question, did they?
On the boroughs, look, I think we actually have also given a bit of thought to this once in a while. I think, Robert, as you know better probably than virtually anybody, politicians don't sort of tend to vote for getting rid of themselves. I think where there could be greater rationalisation is on the functions at a local level. So we do have regional strategic partnerships in London. And I think this is slightly plucking an issue out of the air, but I think it's really important. So, we are spending a huge amount of money on temporary accommodation every week in London. It's a crisis. It's a scandal. There's a massive, massive problem. And we need to move away from each local authority in London having to look at this issue in a silo, and we need to do that on a pan-London basis. And I think more issues-focused rationalisation, probably less likely ends of various boroughs.
Brilliant, good answer. Thanks very much indeed. So, if there are any other questions? Fantastic, look at that. 5 minutes back in your time. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you very much for the panellists. Fantastic.